When I walked into the house, I immediately sensed that something was off. I had always been the apple of my parents' eye, their cherished only child, but today a strange uneasiness filled the air. I looked around, scanning the familiar surroundings, but my mother was nowhere in sight. My heart started racing, a gnawing feeling settling in my chest. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 3 p.m. This wasn't my usual time to be home. A sense of foreboding gripped me, and for a fleeting moment, I considered stepping back out. But I dismissed the thought. Whatever was happening, I needed to face it. I decided to wait in the living room, hoping my mother would return soon. Normally, I would enter the house quietly and retreat to my room or rest on the couch. Today, though, an overwhelming urge to call out for her consumed me. I stood up, pacing. My gaze wandered to the kitchen, which looked unusually deserted. It was strange. My mother was always in the kitchen at this hour, but now it stood silent and empty. Anxiety tightened its grip as I climbed the stairs toward my bedroom, then paused. What if I checked my mother's room first? Maybe she was there, and this unsettling feeling would be explained away. I slowly descended the stairs again, each step heavier than the last. Approaching her bedroom door, I noticed it was closed. My unease deepened. My heart pounded as I reached out to the doorknob. The click of the latch echoed in my ears as the door swung open, revealing a scene I could never have imagined in my darkest dreams. What I saw made my blood run cold. It felt as though the roof of my house had come crashing down on me. In front of me was my mother, my own mother, on the bed with the man I had trusted more than anyone in my life. They were both half-dressed, caught in an act so profoundly shocking that my mind struggled to process it. I stood frozen in the doorway, my whole world collapsing around me. This was the man I had chosen, the one I had allowed into my life, the first person I had ever loved. And now, here he was, betraying me in the worst way possible. I had never experienced love before him. I had given him my trust, my heart, and he had shattered it into pieces. It felt as if every fiber of my being was breaking apart. My two most precious relationships, my mother and my beloved, had joined together to create a moment of unimaginable pain and betrayal. They seemed so lost in their own world that they didn't even notice me standing there. Their complete disregard, their lack of shame, only made it worse. It felt as if this was a regular occurrence for them, something they had grown comfortable doing, knowing no one would be home at this time. I could feel my anger rising like a storm, a rage I had never known before. Though I wasn't one to lose my temper easily, the sight before me ignited a fury that was impossible to contain. I stepped into the room, my voice trembling with both hurt and rage, and yelled, "What is this disgraceful behavior? Don't you have any shame? You're a married woman betraying my father like this. And you." I turned my gaze to the man I had once loved. "How dare you? How dare you do this to me, to my family?" My words hit them like a thunderclap. My mother turned pale, looking as though she'd seen a ghost, while the man I had trusted simply stared back at me with a smug smile, his expression mocking me. That smugness, that complete lack of remorse, only fueled my anger. My mother stood there, speechless, as if the blood had drained from her body. And him. He had the audacity to grin at me, a grin that said he didn't care about the destruction he had caused. I stood there, trembling, my entire world having unraveled in a matter of moments. The betrayal, the humiliation, the loss. I felt it all crashing down on me. It was as if I had walked into my worst nightmare and couldn't wake up. And as I stood there, still stunned by the scene before me, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. My body was burning with rage. I felt as though I might explode, as though I could obliterate both of them in an instant. But before I could act on my emotions, I was pulled back into reality by a memory of how I ended up in Peshawar. Peshawar is a cold northern city known for its majority Pashtun population. Originally, we were residents of Karachi, but due to my father's job transfer, my mother and I had to move here. The first time I laid eyes on the people of this city, I was struck by their unique beauty. Peshawar itself had a charm that left me in awe. I had to transfer from my Karachi university to a local one, which seemed daunting at first. However, as the days went by, I adjusted. I made a few friends, but I never got too close to anyone. It simply wasn't in my nature to become overly friendly. I valued my dignity and avoided getting caught up in unnecessary interactions. Though I wasn't Pashtun, Allah had blessed me with good looks. People often turned to glance at me more than once. Lately, however, I'd noticed something unusual. Someone was watching me. Even in class, I could feel a burning gaze on me, as if someone's eyes were fixed on my every move. I couldn't pinpoint the source, no matter how quickly I turned my head. It began to feel less like paranoia and more like a strange presence constantly lingering nearby. Weeks passed before I finally uncovered the truth. One day, while I was sitting in the canteen eating lunch, a young man suddenly approached my table. He stared directly at me and said, "I need to talk to you." I glanced at him briefly before ignoring him and continuing to eat. I wasn't the type to engage with just anyone. Then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed my hand, pleading, "Please, just listen to me for a moment." The nerve. My anger surged, and before I could think twice, I delivered a sharp slap across his face. The sound of the slap echoed through the canteen, drawing everyone's attention. Nearby tables turned to look, and I shouted, "How dare you touch me? You disgusting creep, what do you think you're doing? Do you think every girl is the same?" My voice carried a warning that anyone could hear. "If you ever try something like this again, I'll break your face." I had always carried myself with pride, and people knew better than to test me. But this boy's boldness pushed me to my limit. He started to retaliate, stepping forward as if to confront me, but before he could, a few onlookers intervened. They pulled him away, leaving me fuming. I grabbed my bag and stormed out, my appetite completely ruined. The rest of the day, my anger lingered, and by the time I reached home, I shut myself in my room. Even when my mother asked what had happened, I refused to tell her. The next day at university, the same boy appeared again, blocking my path. "Please," he said, his voice full of desperation, "just hear me out. You're getting angry at me for no reason." I wasn't interested in engaging with him at all. Without so much as a glance in his direction, I walked past him, quickening my pace until I reached my classroom. I took a seat and tried to focus, but the whole situation was exhausting. As the lecture began, I felt a strange discomfort settling over me. Something about his persistence gnawed at me, even though I hadn't spoken a word to him. After the lecture ended, I stepped out of the classroom and, unsurprisingly, found him waiting there. He was leaning against the wall, clearly expecting me. I couldn't take it anymore. His insistence was suffocating. Ignoring him entirely, I made my way toward the garden area to escape the tension. I needed space. I needed air. But even as I walked away, I couldn't help but feel that his gaze still followed me. The boy came running after me, his footsteps quick and determined. When I suddenly stopped, he skidded to a halt as well, catching his breath. "Please," he begged, his voice steady now. "Just hear me out. Why are you overreacting like this? You're an educated girl. Can't you give me a chance to explain?" I was growing tired of this endless back and forth. Against my better judgment, I decided it would be easier to just hear him out and be done with it. I turned to him and said, "Fine. We can sit in the garden area and talk. But you only have 10 minutes. Say what you need to say quickly and then leave me alone. Don't follow me after this." He nodded earnestly and followed me to the garden area. We sat facing each other, an awkward silence hanging in the air before he finally began. "Hafsa," he said, meeting my eyes. "Ever since you started at this university, I haven't been able to take my eyes off you. You've captured my heart in a way I never thought possible. I can't concentrate on anything. Not my studies, not my daily routine. It's like my whole world revolves around you now." I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end as he continued. "I want us to be together. If you say yes, I'm ready to take the next step. I'll even marry you if that's what you want. Like you, Hafsa. I like you more than I can put into words. With every sentence, my unease grew. I stood abruptly, my voice trembling with anger. How dare you say such things to me? Snap. Do you think I'm that kind of girl? Do you think I'll just say yes to any nonsense you spout? Keep yourself in check. I'm not that kind of person, and I won't tolerate this. If you ever try to pull a stunt like this again, if you so much as say another word, I'll go straight to the department head and report you. I didn't wait for his response. I turned on my heel and stomped away, refusing to look back. I knew he was still staring after me, but I didn't care. My mind was racing, my emotions all over the place. I felt a deep discomfort, an unsettling mix of confusion and frustration. By the time I got home, my anger still hadn't subsided. I was pacing my room, fuming over his audacity. What bothered me even more, though, was my own reaction. I kept questioning why his words had affected me so deeply. He hadn't said anything overtly inappropriate. He'd only expressed his feelings, his admiration for me. Yet I had reacted with such fury that I couldn't understand myself. I sat on my bed for hours, replaying the scene over and over in my mind, unable to shake the turmoil I felt. My mother noticed my strange behavior and asked more than once why I had come home so early from university. She seemed genuinely concerned, but I wasn't ready to explain. I avoided her questions, lying down and pretending to sleep. As night fell, I eventually drifted off. When I woke around 10 p.m., my father was sitting beside me. He had been waiting for me to wake up. "Your mother tells me you've been coming home early for the past 2 days," he said calmly. "Is something wrong at university? You can tell me." Slowly, I began recounting what had happened. I told him about the boy's persistent attention, his bold confession, and my angry reaction. My father listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he sat back, seemingly deep in thought. "You shouldn't have reacted so harshly," he said finally. "If he liked you and chose to express his feelings, that's not a crime. If you didn't feel the same, you could have refused him politely. Anger only escalates situations, especially with young people. Sometimes they take rejection personally, and it can lead to unnecessary problems." I was taken aback by his response. Instead of siding with my outrage, he was advising caution. "If you keep treating him with hostility," my father continued, "he might see it as a challenge. He could start bothering you even more just to prove a point. The best thing you can do is remain calm, make it clear you're not interested, and step away without making it a bigger issue. A strong, confident girl shouldn't have to resort to anger or conflict. She can distance herself from trouble without a fuss." His words lingered in my mind long after our conversation. I hadn't expected this perspective, but deep down, I realized there might be some truth in what he was saying. Perhaps I needed to reconsider how I handled these situations, not by compromising my boundaries, but by addressing them with a level of composure that left no room for further escalation. My father was a wise and patient man. He never let situations escalate and was always adept at resolving matters calmly. He explained to me how I could handle things peacefully, and I realized he was right. The next day, when I arrived at university, I approached the boy directly. I explained to him that I couldn't be in a relationship with him. I told him I valued my dignity and didn't believe in such things before marriage. Love, I said, only feels right within the boundaries of a proper commitment. But the boy kept trying to convince me otherwise. Eventually, he gave up and offered friendship instead. I saw no harm in that, so I accepted his friendship. Little did I know that over time, even my feelings would start to change. I didn't expect it, but as the days went by, I began to see him differently. His care, his respectful manner, and his words of affection started to win me over. Before long, I found myself returning his feelings, and eventually, I agreed to enter a relationship with him. Our connection grew stronger with time. I became so attached that he felt like the only man in my life after my father. I trusted him completely. I couldn't have known that this same person who once seemed so genuine would end up betraying me so deeply. Initially, his feelings were sincere. But after the incident in the canteen, when I slapped him in front of everyone, he changed. That public humiliation seemed to light a fire of revenge within him. Instead of confronting me directly, he took his revenge in the most unimaginable way, by manipulating my mother. My mother, who had always been the epitome of virtue, fell into his trap. I couldn't comprehend how she, a married woman, could cross all boundaries and enter into such a relationship. It didn't happen overnight. Months passed, and I noticed subtle changes in him. He became distant, cold, and sometimes even disrespectful. I brushed it off, trying to ignore the warning signs. Then one day something happened that I couldn't ignore. A friend of his approached me and dropped a bombshell. He told me he had seen my mother and the boy together multiple times, at malls, in restaurants. Hearing this made the ground beneath me crumble. I was in shock and disbelief. I confronted his friend, accusing him of lying, but the seed of doubt was planted. I went home that day, trying to piece everything together. I didn't know who to trust, my mother or him. I was trapped in a whirlpool of confusion and anguish. Then I entered my room, and what I saw turned my entire world upside down. It was a scene I never could have imagined in my worst nightmares. My mother, who always seemed so pious, so devoted to her prayers, was there with him. The very person I had loved and trusted, the man I had let into my life, was with my mother, completely ignoring any sense of decency. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. My mother looked at me, terrified, as if the ground had shifted beneath her. The boy, on the other hand, looked at me with a strange, knowing expression, a smirk that only made my blood boil further. I was trembling with rage. I couldn't believe my own mother would betray me like this. And how could he stoop so low? I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or collapse. Overwhelmed by fury, I stormed out of the room and went straight to my father's study. My mind was racing, fueled by an uncontrollable anger that wouldn't let me think straight. I opened my father's drawer and took out the revolver he kept there. I returned to the room, my hands shaking, and pointed the gun at them both. They barely had time to react. My mother gasped, and the boy stepped back, but I didn't care. I was blinded by my rage. But just as I was about to pull the trigger, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my father. His calm presence brought me back from the brink, if only for a moment. In my daze, I inadvertently pulled the trigger, and the gun fired. I watched in shock as the bullet struck my mother's foot. The boy immediately jumped away from her, startled. My mother screamed in pain, clutching her foot, and I dropped the revolver in disbelief at what I'd just done. The moment was surreal, and the room felt as if it were spinning. My father's steady voice brought me back to reality. He didn't shout, didn't lose his temper. Instead, he carefully assessed the situation. He asked me to step back, to breathe, and slowly took control of the chaos. Even in such a moment of betrayal and heartbreak, he reminded me that anger would only make things worse. I was jolted out of my rage the moment my father placed his hand on my shoulder. As the shot echoed through the room, it was as if everyone had suddenly come to life. I stood there, paralyzed, watching my mother crumple to the floor. The realization of what I'd done sank in quickly. I had just fired at my own mother. Despite everything, she was still my mother, and I needed to know the truth. What was going on? Why had this happened? I hadn't even sought confirmation before pulling the trigger. Blood started gushing from her leg, and without wasting any time, my father and I rushed her to the hospital. Faraz, the man at the center of it all, fled the scene, and neither of us gave him a second glance. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was saving my mother. At the hospital, the doctors quickly took her in and told us we needed to arrange for blood immediately. My father managed to get the blood within minutes, and after a long and grueling operation, my mother's condition began to stabilize. Still, the tension between my father and me was palpable as we sat silently in the hospital corridor. Neither of us spoke, We simply sat, lost in our thoughts. I couldn't bring myself to look at him, and he didn't meet my eyes either. I could understand his pain. He had just witnessed his wife in a state that would shatter any man's heart. Meanwhile, I was grappling with the guilt of having hurt my own mother, no matter the betrayal. Despite our shared agony, neither of us could find the words to console the other. We both knew we needed each other's strength, yet the weight of what had happened left us unable to face one another. After some time, the doctors informed us that we could visit my mother. The announcement was like a lifeline, but even so, I hesitated. Part of me longed to see her, to make sure she was truly okay. But another part of me screamed that she didn't deserve forgiveness. She had committed an unthinkable act, one that seemed impossible to reconcile. My heart was pulling me one way, while my mind insisted I shouldn't go. I glanced at my father, who was staring at the floor, lost in his own turmoil. We'd been sitting in that corridor for what felt like half an hour when a nurse came out again. "Your mother is asking for you," she said. "She wants to talk to you." I looked at my father again, and this time, he lifted his eyes to meet mine. We shared a silent moment of understanding, and together we stood up. Without a word, we walked into my mother's room. She looked so frail, as if the weight of 100 years had settled on her in an instant. I sat down next to her bed, while my father stood by her feet. My mother suddenly reached out, took my hand, and brought it to her lips. "My child," she said, her voice trembling, "I know what you saw. Anyone in your position would have doubted me, would have hated me. But please listen to my side of the story. Let me explain why I did what I did." Her words caught both my father's and my attention. We leaned in closer, eager to understand. My mother looked me directly in the eye, tears streaming down her face. "I did all of this for you," she said. "It was a sacrifice I made for my daughter." Her statement stunned me. My father and I exchanged confused glances, not sure what she was trying to say. She continued, her voice growing weaker yet more determined. "I knew about your feelings for Faraz. He came to me first before he ever approached you. He sought my permission before he proposed to you. But when you rejected him so publicly, when you slapped him in front of everyone, it wounded his pride. He became vindictive." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Faraz had sought her approval, and I, unknowingly, had turned that moment into something far darker. My mother's voice shook as she went on. "Faraz wasn't just upset. He made it a matter of his ego. He told me he would ruin you. He threatened to edit your photos and spread them online. He wanted to destroy your reputation. And if not that, he said he'd make sure your wedding day would be a nightmare, that he'd humiliate you in front of everyone." Hearing this was like a dagger to the heart. I'd never imagined the situation could be this complex, this tangled. My mother's betrayal had a reason, one I could never have predicted. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying, in her own flawed way, to protect me. As my mother continued, her voice broke and tears streamed down her face. She told me how Faraz had blackmailed her, threatening to ruin my reputation, to destroy the life she had tried so hard to protect. When she tried to stand up to him, he dismissed her defiance, saying that I would never believe her. I realized then that she was right. If she had tried to warn me, I wouldn't have believed her. Faraz had manipulated the situation so cleverly that I would have thought my mother was lying out of jealousy or distrust. Her trembling words hit me like a tidal wave. She confessed that, in a moment of desperation, she had agreed to his vile demand. He wanted a night with her, time alone together in exchange for leaving me alone. It was the ultimate sacrifice, and it tore her apart. "I know what I did was wrong," she whispered, sobbing. "But nothing in this world is more precious to me than you. I made this choice for you." I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. My mother, my guiding light, had put her dignity on the line for me, only to be misunderstood and betrayed in return. I had nearly taken her life, not realizing that she had already given so much for mine. My body shook as tears streamed down my face. I couldn't find words to respond. My throat closed up, and I felt like I might crumble into pieces. Overcome by the weight of her words and my own guilt, I rose and quietly left the room. I couldn't bear to look at her, not because I was angry, but because I was ashamed. She had sacrificed everything to protect me, and I had repaid her with violence. Outside, my mind reeled, numb from the realization of what had transpired. I stayed away from her for several days, too overwhelmed to face her again. The guilt gnawed at me, making it difficult to sleep, eat, or even think straight. I couldn't believe the person I had become in that moment of rage. But then one day my mother wrapped me in her arms and whispered, "I forgive you, my child. What you did was out of anger. It's not your fault." Her words gave me a measure of peace, though the memory of what had happened lingered. Slowly we began to rebuild our relationship. Her forgiveness was like a soothing balm on a deep wound. I promised myself that I would never let anger control me again. That promise, however, did not extend to Faraz. I filed a police complaint against him, providing evidence of his threats and his attempts to coerce my mother. I made sure the authorities knew how he had harassed her and tried to manipulate me. The court took my testimony seriously, and he was eventually convicted and sentenced for his actions. It was a small victory, but it gave me a sense of justice. In the end, I learned that anger could be destructive, even for those who are in the right. My own rage had led to a terrible moment that could have ended in an even greater tragedy. From that day forward, I vowed to control my emotions, to stay calm no matter what challenges came my way. Because true strength lies not in acting on rage, but in overcoming it.